In this country, we believe that there should be freedom for all, even though not all of us believe in it. Join Tom and Chase as they explore politics, economics, and everything else that threatens your individual liberty. This is the Free For All Podcast.
All right, welcome back, guys. Free For All episode 20.
Welcome back, guys, to the 20th episode of the Free For All podcast. I'm sorry that it's been about 3 weeks since our last show. I was moving into a new apartment, and then we had, obviously, Memorial Day weekend, and then Father's Day as well, and Tom and I couldn't find time to get to the studio to record. But we are back this week with an episode chock full of topics to discuss from the last few weeks that we've been gone. As always, we appreciate everybody listening. Please remember to keep up with us on our socials, Instagram at Free For All Podcast and Twitter at FFA Podcast 1776. And also remember that our show is available wherever you guys listen to your podcast, be it YouTube, Spotify, Google Play, or Apple Podcasts. I'm sorry, can't speak today. So obviously I said we've got quite a few topics to discuss, and I'm not lying. So let's go ahead and get into what we've got for you guys this episode. So the first topic that Tom and I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about was the increase in VAERS reporting since the release of the vaccine. And I kind of wanted to start out this segment by simply saying that we pretty much called this from the very beginning. We actually, I want to say it was 2 episodes ago now. We kind of talked about the fact that this vaccine was pretty much experimental and the dangers of putting unknown substances into your body will present themselves at some point down the road, and we're pretty much nearly there. So on June 10th, 9 News Australia essentially broke a story via Twitter about a woman who died because of a blood clotting issue in Australia after receiving both doses of the vaccine. And then that very same day, another story broke that the CDC was holding an emergency meeting to discuss the quote-unquote higher than expected cases of heart inflammation and blood clotting related to the vaccine.
Yeah, and I said previously that I had a family member get admitted to the hospital for cardiac issues, and these symptoms popped up the day of getting the second dose of the vaccine. So I don't know. People just keep denying that it has some sort of connection, and there's these reports that come out and they just get swept under the rug.
Yeah, and all of this pretty much goes to show that nothing created in haste is ever good or of any kind of quality. Because remember that this vaccine was obviously developed and released in under a single year, and that was never a good idea to begin with. The FDA, the government's obviously their own scientists from another corrupt alphabet agency that couldn't even approve this vaccine themselves. And so not to mention Moderna and Pfizer have never actually brought a successful vaccine to the market ever. This is the first one that they've ever brought to market since they've existed. And we're now seeing why none of them have ever passed clinical testing stages.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I talk about the FDA and how they don't approve stuff. Not that we like the FDA, but it's just if you're going to say that all the scientists say take it, then maybe all of them should be saying take it. But I made a really bad comparison the other day, but I still think it's a good point. And I was talking to somebody, I said that I would rather take heroin off the street than get the vaccine. And I know that sounds stupid or whatever, but at least people pay money to get heroin. And I just find it really creepy that the vaccine is free. And in fact, many jobs will give you a bonus or paid time off to get it. We talked about, if it's so great, why do you have to force people to get it, basically? And the government and all the big corporations who I already didn't trust before all this are trying to push it on everybody just like a drug dealer would. So what's the difference between that and heroin? You're just, you're sticking a suspicious needle in your arm, and they're basically saying you'll be a cool kid if you get it. But here's the difference, because at least if somebody kills you with heroin, they're charged with second-degree murder. I mean, if they get caught or whatever. But if you die from the vaccine, you can't do anything to these companies. You can maybe make a VAERS report or whatever, but people will pretty much still gaslight you, and the media will gaslight you and say, oh, this is not connected to the vaccine, no matter what evidence you present.
And see, that was part of the fine print in getting the vaccine, is that both Moderna and Pfizer could be completely absolved of any sort of legal responsibility for any of the adverse reactions that you do report to VAERS. So that's a problem in and of itself. But when we're on the topic of the COVID vaccine, we also kind of wanted to touch on the Fauci email leak that came out while we were, kind of on our hiatus. That was completely unplanned. So obviously, that whistleblower leaked emails between Fauci and the lab in Wuhan where the virus originated. And in these emails, a kind of disturbing fact arises that Fauci's own foundation pretty much actually donated money to the lab years prior to support that lab's development and research of a coronavirus in which they were planning to manipulate to do certain things. Fauci quite literally helped fund this venture, but we're essentially somehow supposed to still trust him when he's arguably half the reason the pandemic even started to begin with. And what's funny to me is the Fauci email leak also pretty much confirmed a theory that I had presented in the very first episode of our show, which is that this virus is most definitely man-made. This virus does not behave like a typical coronavirus does, and there's no staple symptoms. It affects everybody to varying degrees and levels, and you can't really even tell that you have it unless you get tested for it. And it's arguably a breach of the Geneva Convention, in which chemical and bioweapons were banned from existence and development after the atrocities that occurred during World War II, and even World War I, with sarin and chlorine gas and all of that kind of stuff. People engineering different things to use them to kill people. You could very arguably throw that under the same category if this virus was purposely being engineered by humans to be able to inflict upon damage to other humans. Aside from that, the leak also pretty much proves he should have never been trusted from the very beginning, and now millions of Americans who have taken this experimental vaccine could be in jeopardy of issues like heart inflammation or blood clots, simply because of his lies and negligence.
Yeah, and what's funny is it kind of just goes to show, if bioweapons can still be made and stuff, that all these international pacts like the Geneva Convention don't really mean much, because you just do something by secret or whatever. But what's funny is that it's the U.S. government, or at least a U.S. government official in Fauci, funding something with a supposed enemy to do gain of function research. I don't know. But speaking of Darth Fauci, who's literally Emperor Palpatine, because like I said, he's acting like he's our savior and our leader or whatever, but he's really just supporting our enemies. I wanted to throw in a little clip of you guys where Fauci responds to the right-wing criticism that he's always changing his mind and changing the rules. Like we talked about, he moves the goalposts and changes what the decision on masks and social distancing and stuff like that. So this clip that we're about to pull up is from the Sway podcast, which is actually produced by the New York Times. So here's the clip right now. Take a listen.
The people who are giving the ad hominems are saying, Fauci misled us. First he said no masks, then he said mask. Well, let me give you a flash. That's the way science works. You work with the data you have at the time. It is essential as a scientist that you evolve your opinion and your recommendations based on the data as it evolves. That is the nature of science.
Okay, so obviously that video is really just trying to defend himself from, like I said, the criticism that he's changing his mind all the time. And honestly, that is a pretty decent argument. I mean, that's what science is supposed to be. You're supposed to always be proving yourself wrong and trying to find the truth or whatever. But I don't know how we're supposed to trust somebody like this when he admits that he has such a bad track record. And we talked about previously, he has a bad track record going back decades. So it's just really a dodge. And he's saying, it kind of goes back to the thing where he says, if you don't trust Dr. Fauci, you don't trust science or whatever. And he's trying to, I don't know, basically excuse himself for being wrong, I guess.
Well, but also we have to remember that you can't really like. He's talking about science, constantly evolving, and he should constantly change his opinion on things and stuff like that. But okay, like then when your opinion changes, you can't just continue with the same response that you had originally. Like if you get new data that proves you wrong and then you continue with the same solution that you came up with the first time, you're essentially saying that the new data that you found doesn't matter because you already came up with the solution the first time around. And so that's how we got all these year-long lockdowns in certain states like New York and California, that seem never ending. And even as their cases are dropping, they're not getting rid of any of the safety precautions or anything like that. And so, you can't play games with people's lives like that because many people lost their jobs, their livelihoods, foreclosed on their homes, went bankrupt, and everything, all because of these stupid lockdowns. And so for him to basically admit that he was repeatedly wrong and then try and scapegoat himself out of taking any kind of responsibility for it is just stupid. Like, I'm not going to trust somebody like that.
Yeah, he's lost all credibility at this point. But I think we've harped on Fauci a little much, so we'll get moving on to the next topic here. So why don't you start that off?
So basically, this was another, funny event to come out of the last 3 weeks. I don't know if anybody was paying attention, but basically at the end of May, Biden addressed a couple groups of service members at Joint Base Langley in Eustis, Virginia. And during this address, he stated that he was launching a strategy to combat quote unquote domestic terrorism, white supremacy, and anti-government ideology, in which he essentially asked the spectators to monitor their friends and family and to report any potentially quote unquote radicalized or anti-government quote unquote individuals to the FBI and local law enforcement. And this gave me some serious, like, eerie 1984 type vibes. And the first thing about this is, this sort of thinking is extremely dangerous, but also, a breach of rights to free speech, obviously. If you speak in support of the government, then you're fine. But then if you criticize them, you're essentially now a criminal. Just imagine if everybody actually did this. How many of your friends and family are going to be kidnapped during the night and never seen again? And don't for a single second think that that's some sort of thing that would never happen just because we live in the United States. Because it's happened in every single failed communist state that's ever existed. Communism essentially exists to wipe out the opposition in its entirety, and this includes citizens who don't subscribe to the communist ideology. So if you don't agree, you're likely to disappear or be murdered by your own government. That's how it goes when you're dealing with communists. And so obviously libertarians in general, given that most of us are very anti-government, would be first up on the chopping block simply for advocating that people be free instead of controlled by a central government. And that's a very big problem.
Yeah, and even if you're not like necessarily like anti-government in general or like you just have to be anti what the government's doing right now. Like you can be a Republican, you can be whatever. I mean, just like look back in history, the Nazis, the communists and stuff like that, they would take out the opposing parties by, passing laws like this or censoring them or whatever. And so it just goes back to, you might think that it's really just a fringe group of people that this law is targeting, but in the end, it provides a vehicle for pretty much anybody to be targeted for political means or just any means, personal means. But another big thing is that the Libertarian Party, which we'll talk about later, kind of spent this whole time using their platform not to fight this overwhelmingly authoritarian Biden regime getting in power. And when, in fact, this whole 2020, they probably aided it through all their BLM posting. But what's happening now is that, since all these people, I mean, not that libertarians are that big of a force, but this is all these people that supported BLM and they thought they were just supporting black people or whatever, and not supporting the inevitable degradation of the Constitution. But, just all these white people in general, or like these bystanders or these centrists or whatever, that might have been like, yeah, okay, like BLM, whatever, you think it's a benign idea and you support it, you're really just putting yourself on the chopping block, because now we have somebody in office who, I mean, it wasn't just BLM that got Biden in, it was a bunch of fake news and shit. But now we have somebody in the office who who will let just anybody get taken out, anybody get canceled, anybody get, like we said, targeted by the government, have your guns taken away or interrogated or whatever. And it just kind of goes back to how this whole American leftist idea that's coming up of equality, or whatever they want to call it, it really just has nothing to do with equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity has been here for a while. We're just seeing a shift to a culture where minorities have certain rights that whites do not. And I know it's cutting edge for me to be saying this, but I'm not always saying that they're, treated well as minorities. But there's little talk about how whites, and specifically white males, are actively demonized and scrutinized more and more, pretty much every year these past few years. And I don't know if it's a big organized effort, like these universities making it easier for minorities to get in, actively disadvantaging white people, or just more disorganized and social things, like what rap lyrics you can say if you're not black. So it's just kind of like, all these people thought, okay, we're supporting, we're helping, whatever, and they push for these leftists to get in, and now it's not even like 6 months into the presidency, and all this shit's happening economically, and then there's all this terrible red flag policy being pushed across.
Yeah, and then obviously we had, I think our next topic was Biden, essentially confessing that he has handlers. I think we have that clip that we were going to play for you right now.
I'll take your questions, and as usual, folks, they gave me a list of the people I'm going to call on. So, Jonathan, Associated Press.
So basically, Biden addressed reporters after his meeting with Vladimir Putin, in which he apparently discussed the U.S. relationship with Russia and the perpetuated but debunked claim that Russia meddled in the 2016 U.S. election. At the end of his remarks that he made, Biden stated essentially that he was given a list by they, them, whoever, likely meaning his handlers, and the people controlling him, of people to call on to ask questions. And so I was coughing because I was laughing as I was watching this video. This is so laughable at this point, because the fact of the matter is that this proves that people from inside the White House are essentially controlling what he does and what he says. Why else would he have been given a list of people to call on in specific if it wasn't because they were pre-screened underhand questions that he could easily answer or dodge? We all know that if somebody asks him a difficult question, the only thing he can do is either mumble, stutter, or say his catchphrase, "Come on, man." He's very clearly mentally ill and unfit to hold any kind of office, obviously, especially the office of president. He presents textbook signs of dementia and possibly even Alzheimer's, and it's sad that the left essentially resorted to manipulating him and using him as a puppet to further this radicalized agenda of theirs.
Yeah, and it's not just "come on, man." It's like, pointing his finger in people's chests, or one dude he called fat, and he's like, "Oh, let's do a push-up contest. Come on, man." And it's like, dude, you are some old-ass man who's not even there. And you can tell, like, he's got that dementia anger because he can't put it all together. But it's unbelievable that people think that that's an appropriate president to have, even if you think what he says is good, or what people tell him to say is good. But, of course, back when Trump was in office, Trump and all his press secretaries were given these loaded questions when they were interviewed or doing press conferences about, like, white supremacy and other dumb shit. Like, "Oh, will you denounce white supremacy?" And it's like, yeah. And he actually put the KKK on the terrorist list. So it's just kind of stupid you even say that. But seriously, like with this double standard of questions being asked, like what does this say about the government, like how the government and the media create our perception of things? If there's this big collusion to love and cherish this dementia patient, yet the same media is questioning Trump's faculties. They were always saying, "Oh, Trump could be 25th Amendment or whatever."
Well, yeah, they had him. They had him mentally checked like 2 or 3 times because they were saying he was mentally unfit to hold office or whatever. And it's like kind of funny that they were trying so hard to do that because then it's like Mike Pence takes over and don't you hate him more? But whatever.
It's just not thinking down the road for a lot of these, at least mainstream leftists. But another thing I want to comment on is that Biden was talking about the subject of fake news not too long ago. I don't know, in the past week or two, but he said something along the lines of, quote, "It's not like back in the day when you just had Walter Cronkite on the news, like basically just saying like one guy reporting and he's the one credible dude that everyone can believe." And I just think this is so stupid because, I mean, regardless of whether or not we have seen an uptick lately in the past few years, especially with the internet of fact checking and all that, and with alternate media and stuff. But it's just kind of a stupid point because how is there more truth in one person's basically monopoly on information? He's the gatekeeper of information than there is in all these competing news sources. Like, I thought freedom of speech and discussion was the way that we found the truth. But I guess not if you're a big news conglomerate. But, people seriously think that the news used to be more credible when basically the beliefs of millions of Americans were in the hands of just a few reporters or news agencies. And if we learn anything about government control or how these telecommunications monopolies work, basically with stuff guaranteed by government laws and infrastructure and stuff like that, early on there were just a few networks and just a few were able to get on cable TV and stuff like that and radio. But what we know is when we have these monopolies or when we have less competition because less companies are in there, the service you get is always worse and the money they get is always greater. That's just how it works. And so obviously we're seeing over time these big media giants are getting some competition via the internet and stuff because even in the 2000s, like there's Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, but there weren't hundreds, thousands of, it was just like the niche, like this is the leftist, this is the Fox News for the right wing or whatever. But now there's like way better news for, pretty much anybody who wants to get their own sort of niche news. And these media giants finally have some competition. They can't shape the narrative like they used to. And they sure as hell can't get the money like they used to because people are turning their attention to online sources. And really the only network that is doing good prime time is Fox. I mean, CNN and all that stuff is just stuck on in airports. And that's why they get all their viewers.
Yeah, and I saw I think it was like a breakdown of the money that CNN made last year, and then according to like their view rate, and they were saying that CNN lost so much money because they lost it was like a third of their viewer base basically last year. So CNN, yeah, definitely is not doing very well. They're essentially continuing to lose money, but that's their own fault.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that, and then we've got 2 more topics for you guys to cover. This one was Kamala Harris's statements on immigration, and I think we actually have a little bit of a video clip to play for you guys right now too for that.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
Yeah, so basically, she's sitting there in Guatemala last week and told members in the press that citizens from that region would not be allowed into the U.S. Via the U.S.-Mexico border, and that the U.S. would strictly enforce its immigration laws. And this is hilarious, given the fact that they called Trump a xenophobe for doing literally the exact same thing she just described. And I remember them saying, quote unquote, no human is illegal. And this is just another case of goalposts being moved when it's convenient for them. The Democrats and the Biden administration in general are doing the exact opposite of what they said they would during the campaign. And this is pretty predictable to everybody but the sheep that voted for the two of them. But given this fact, we can reasonably speculate that Biden could reverse his stance on the border wall, especially because his administration has already told the press that he hasn't made a firm decision about the future of the wall, despite his executive order to halt its construction on the first day that he was in office. They actually even mentioned that funding was set aside by Congress to finish the wall after Joe Biden had actually even been elected. But the exact bill or congressional action that actually set aside the funding kind of remains unclear to a lot of people.
Yeah, it just seems like Biden and Kamala Harris are doing what DC does best, and they're really just taking the problems that they promised to fix and pushing them off, just kicking the can down the road, basically. Same thing with Republicans when they say they're going to talk about the debt, but they get in and just raise the debt ceiling. And they just do stuff like this to not look bad to either side, just to kind of, I don't know, just play the rules and please the lobbyists or whatever. But Biden's actions really, in this case, like you talk about either turning illegal immigrants around, but the wall's also not really built, but it is built in certain sections. I don't think that any of this is going to satisfy either the left or the right.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think a lot of people are going to be annoyed and pissed off with it. But
Yeah. And like, what's funny about Kamala is that she's up there, and I mean, just like every speech I see her, she looks like, I don't know if she's like distraught or whatever, but she definitely looks tired, and she looks like worn down, and her hair is almost always messed up, which, I mean, I'm not like big into like criticizing people's looks or whatever, but it just looks like she's been kind of worn down because this whole time they just kind of been dodging tough questions, dodging the media, and it's just really tough to keep secrets and lie, obviously.
yeah. And then the last topic that we kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but kind of has to do with the Libertarian Party because of this supposed coup that occurred. And so, Tom and I are both aware that we have some mixed listeners from various political ideologies. Some of you may lean conservative, while some of you may be full-fledged libertarians like Tom and I are. And so some of you may not have even heard about this. If anybody's familiar with the comic Dave Smith, he's a comedian and staunch libertarian. He's kind of pumped lots of new followers into the Mises Caucus, and the Mises Caucus is obviously supported by the Mises Institute. Some of these followers have basically ran for positions in the Libertarian Party at the state level in various different states, and they've won in landslide victories because of all of these supporters being pumped in by Dave Smith. So Juletta Jarvis, who was the leader of the LP in the state of New Hampshire, she was the recent elected official. She released a statement which essentially said that anybody who was a member of the Libertarian Party in that state was no longer a member of the party, and that decision was final because she won leadership in a landslide and she could do what she wanted. She then stated that she was going to unilaterally pass, meaning there would be no party vote on the issue, a set of laws for the party that would extend her term to 4 years. And then, on top of that, the Libertarian National Committee, the LNC, released a statement that essentially endorsed her action. And then the leader of the LP, John Bishop Hinchman, released another statement saying that anybody who casts blame or smears his name publicly would be sued for defamation. And this was just a huge shock to libertarians everywhere, because this is the literal leader of the Libertarian Party nationwide, threatening to sue other libertarians if they criticize him or question his actions. Basically, like one of the most unlibertarian things you could do. And this created a massive pushback against the LP on social media, with many libertarians, burning LP T-shirts and denouncing the National Party, as well as the LP in New Hampshire itself. And Tom and I have kind of discussed this several times on our show before, in which there's kind of this distinction between libertarian ideology, calling yourself a libertarian, and then the actual big letter L Libertarian Party in the United States. The LP has consistently proven itself to be inept at answering, the social and economical dilemmas of modern day politics, and they're kind of too hyper focused on infighting within their own political party about how to implement the specific ideology. This specifically is why libertarians, including Tom and I, basically consider ourselves libertarian, but we don't identify or align with the actual party of the same name.
Yeah, I don't even know. I don't really feel like the Libertarian Party is genuine. Like, I understand there's all this infighting and certain people like the Mises Caucus. Like, I personally believe in the Mises Caucus. That would be who I support. I like Dave Smith. I like these ideas before I even liked Dave Smith. And just certain people like the Mises Caucus want to be principled. And then others, like the Pragmatist Caucus, obviously just try to get as many people into the party as possible, regardless of what the platform really is. And obviously this is going to be the nature of pretty much any political party, so you can't blame them for wanting to be pragmatic or whatever. But yeah, the biggest thing that they've messed up is when it comes to attracting people and attracting them, getting them into the party, and what their messaging is, because the messaging's not working. It worked for Dave Smith, and that's why he was able to get so many people in the party, is because he had all these listeners and there weren't too many party members. But in terms of the LP, like their social media accounts and stuff like that, their messaging is terrible. And I've said it in previous episodes. I think the LP could have really taken 2020 by the reins and gotten a huge expansion. Luckily, Dave Smith brought in a lot of people. He was saying that he was telling people to join last year, but people didn't really get too excited until he decided to try to throw his hat in the ring for presidential nomination in the next election. But the LP really botched 2020. They could have been the one party that was really avidly against the lockdowns and the mandates, because even Republicans in the beginning were afraid to take a stand against that, and while people were just getting let go left and right from their jobs. And they could have gotten all these people supporting them, but instead they took the time to support BLM. And even if you support BLM and you attract people to the party, you're not going to achieve your end goal of getting libertarian ideas across, because you're getting people in the party or attracting people or whatever that would never want to secure liberty for all. So it's kind of self-defeating to want to prioritize whether or not you think, I think Black Lives Matter, but I don't support the organization, so they shouldn't really be posing quasi-BLM stuff in order to attract the right sort of people to the party. So another thing that makes me think that it's not genuine is that most people's perception of the Libertarian National Convention, the convention itself, and just how it works and how people get elected, if they even know that the Libertarian National Convention exists, which most people, even if they know about the party, probably don't know that it's even got national presence. But anyhow, most people, what they think about, if they know about it, is in 2016, when a candidate for the party leader stripped naked on stage, literally took off all his clothes, and he was escorted off stage. And that was here in Orlando. Luckily, I didn't go, because it just seems like a shit show. And then his response was, when he was getting interviewed on TV, that, quote, "the political system is so corrupt that it needs to be stripped down to nothing, end quote. And just honestly, like, whether or not that's a true statement, it's just like it's just fucking terrible messaging. Like, I remember when Austin Peterson in 2016 was running for a Libertarian presidential nomination, and they were having the debate on Stossel's show, and he got booed for saying that he doesn't think it should be legal to sell heroin to a 2-year-old, which is, I guess that's the biggest thing when it comes to electing a candidate, I guess. But like, why is this even an issue? Like, when will something like this even become remotely relevant in our lifetime? It's just people's anger is directed in the wrong place. Like, we need to all come together around lowering taxes and decreasing regulations and stuff like that, and not stuff or just like infighting about drugs and stupid shit that almost nobody supports. But the last crazy thing, we were talking about the coup of the LP in New Hampshire, is that all this information of the party members for the LP of New Hampshire, I don't know if like their license information and stuff, like definitely their address, names, phone numbers, email, was all basically taken. All the, I guess, I don't know if it was all the servers or whatever, but all of it was taken by this new LP queen or whatever's going on there. And this is just going to become a huge case of fraud because all this information's stolen, and somebody's probably going to sell it on the internet or something. Who knows what's going to happen with it? But regardless of what happens, I mean, it's just another thing to embarrass and discredit the LP further, to have this coup going on, and especially if it becomes a legal issue with fraud and stuff like that. And even though I don't care too much about the LP, like I don't vote for them, but regardless, stuff like this still affects how people perceive the ideas of liberty, or at least perceive the people who believe in those ideas, which will affect how they perceive the idea itself. And stuff like this will also keep genuine people like Dave Smith, who I've been a fan of for years, from even getting into office with all this corruption and just unilaterally overriding votes. It might even discourage people from running in the first place. And just look back to 2016 presidential election. I mean, Trump barely got into office by financing himself, basically, for most of the way. So what makes people think that there's not going to be this type of sabotaging at a smaller level with third parties and stuff like that? And I think these ideas are way better than Trump's that Dave Smith has. Not everybody's going to agree, but personally, I think it's more imperative to them that the powers that be suppress these ideas. I mean, there's obviously ideas that he has and that Trump has that are similar, and they both want to be suppressed by the mainstream media. And basically, all these frauds, and I mean, media is terrible, but all these frauds, like stealing people's information and like basically performing a coup at the party, they need to just be in prison.
Well, and you're talking about how it kind of turns people off to the ideas of liberty and everything. Who was the Libertarian Party nominee in 2016? Wasn't it Gary Johnson?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, like, I remember way back in 2016, like, I remember Gary Johnson did, wasn't it? I can't remember which late night show it was, but he did an interview on one of those late night talk shows. I can't remember if it was Conan or Jay Leno, or I don't know what it was, but he did one of those late night talk shows, and he basically he got up on stage and was basically like smoking a joint and stuff like that, and was talking about weed the entire time and like all this other stuff. And it's like, well, obviously libertarians want marijuana legalized and everything. Like, that's not the entirety of the Libertarian Party's platform either and everything. And I remember just sitting there like, nobody's going to vote for this guy. Like, yeah, okay, you appeal to the very niche group of stoners across the United States, but like, you're not going to appeal to everybody in terms of the rest of the Libertarian Party platform. Nobody's going to sit up there and watch you and be like, oh yeah, that's the guy I want to be my president. And it's just like, stuff like that is what turns people off to the rest of the Libertarian Party platform and the other ideas of liberty. And it's another example of how a lot of these political parties, Democrats, Republicans, and now even the Libertarian Party are completely out of touch with culture and completely out of touch with what America needs and stuff like that. And they're too hyper focused on one or two specific things to attract the majority of Americans who sit in the middle of the aisle and don't identify as either left or right. And that's the biggest issue, is that when these election cycles happen and everything, a lot of those people that are in the middle end up siding with either a Democrat or Republican instead of the party that's in the middle, because the candidates are literal jokes and nobody ever takes them seriously. I thought Jo Jorgensen was probably the most decent libertarian candidate I had seen in a while in terms of her ideas and her solutions to a lot of different problems. But the problem was a lot of people did not pay attention to her, and it wasn't necessarily because she wasn't serious. I think it's just a lot of funding issues, and that people just historically in the past do not take the Libertarian Party seriously. And so you kind of end up screwing over those future candidates that come down the road that may be better representatives of what that LP platform is. You screw them over in the fact that, years ago when you ran, you were such a joke that nobody paid attention to the party. And now everybody pays no attention to the party because, historically speaking, that's what they think of. And so there's no reason for them to pay attention. And so it kind of just makes it almost impossible for Libertarian Party candidates when it comes to national elections to gain any kind of traction with the rest of the populace, because that's the view that they have of the LP, and they're not willing to give them the time of day. So I definitely think that's a big issue, and why a lot of us just don't identify with the LP, because they can't fix the simplest of problems.
Yeah, and another issue is like Gary Johnson. He did bring in votes, but he did turn off a lot of people as well, as probably as many as he brought in their votes. But we don't have. I mean, like, even Jo Jorgensen, like, we don't have, like, she wasn't big. Like, nobody knew who she was. She didn't have a social media presence or whatever. It's like, I mean, even Dave Smith, he has, instead of a couple thousand followers when he's about to run, he has 50,000 or so on Instagram or whatever, and hundreds of thousands on Twitter, especially after he went on Joe Rogan a few times. And we just need somebody who, because I think he articulates pretty well. There's obviously nobody who I know of that's even equivalent to Ron Paul, but Dave Smith articulates pretty well, and he's got a little bit of a following, like I said. So hopefully he can bring some momentum to this party, or at least change the platform to make it more prioritized, because I know one of the things he wants to do is to prioritize, what means the most first, and not just worry about stupid shit like 2-year-olds on heroin. And, the problem is that Ron Paul spoke like that too. And he's very kind of realistic approach to things. He's like, yeah, I care about liberty, but also like, here's X, Y, and Z, Y. Whereas people like Gary Johnson or Jo Jorgensen, they're not as good at articulating things. They might get too deep into theory, at least with Jorgensen. But like Gary Johnson, he's very fiscally conservative, socially liberal. He's not like, he doesn't really have a good answer to things. He just wants to say we're a mix of two things you might like. And just like, even though he was a governor of New Mexico, it's pretty sad that he couldn't bring in the momentum that the party really needed. So I don't know if Dave Smith will, but at least he's going to bring in a lot of ideas and somewhat popularity this time. So hopefully.
And see, the one thing that I'd say that's probably good about Dave Smith possibly running is this whole deal with, the fact that the primary reason Trump got elected originally was because of the fact that a lot of people viewed him as an outsider, and that he was a businessman first, and that he had seen the real world and that kind of thing. And that's what a lot of people were attracted to when he ran. And so I think that it's almost the same sort of thing with Dave Smith, in the fact that he's a comedian first, and that, he's had his own business and doing stand-up for a long time, and has paid real world person taxes and has been a normal person. and everything, and hasn't been a career politician that's now in his 60s or 70s, like the majority of politicians we have nowadays. I think that would also be attractive to people as well, is that to be a comedian, you have to be a pretty likable person or you're not going to be a successful comedian. People have to like you. People have to think you're funny, and then have to do both of those enough to pay for tickets to come see you perform and everything. And that's where comedians make their money. They're not going to make their money off, somebody streaming 20 minutes of one of their comedy specials or something like that on Netflix. Like that's not gonna fit the bill, for them and be able to get them any kind of income or anything. So these people have to be likable and have to be funny for people to come and pay to see them perform. And I think that if Dave Smith is a comedian and is a successful one at that, he may be one of the people that the Libertarian Party has waited on to start to pull all those people that are standing in the middle of the aisle or whatever, pull them into the Libertarian Party and, possibly stand a fighting chance the next, election cycle.
Yeah, but I don't know if whoever controls the Libertarian Party really ever wants them to win, because like I said, I don't really think they're genuine because they just seem to be self-sabotaging. But obviously Dave kind of has the same quality as Trump, to where he will speak his mind and he'll call out bullshit in real time, and he'll go after people who go after him, which is really powerful. And obviously they try to silence it with Trump, and like I said, I likened him to Trump. Like they try to silence Trump and they try to silence Dave Smith. They try to, take over LP New Hampshire, and so the Mises Caucus can't get their people in and stuff like that. So who knows what they're going to do in the future? But it just goes to show that the most powerful political voice that we can have nowadays is somebody who is really unfiltered and has somewhat of a following and is good at speaking and somewhat likable. So I hope that he really, because I think he demonstrates all those. He's been a pretty good podcaster for a while. So I hope that there's a good future in that, but it should kind of be scary to everybody that even just with these small parties that there's huge like a coup going on.
Yeah.
And we can't even have our movement get through that we've been trying to push for a few years with the Mises Caucus.
Yeah, it doesn't serve any kind of productive purpose at all. But I think that's going to cut it for this show. Obviously, we had several different topics we wanted to get through because we'd been gone for so long. But I think we covered each one of those pretty well in terms of at least getting the meat of the problem and everything, and giving our 2 cents on each one of those issues. But obviously, again, we apologize that the show was 3 weeks late this time around. We just had lots of different holidays back to back. And obviously I was a little bit preoccupied with some personal stuff. So, but we're glad we finally got to get back in the studio and produce some content for you guys. Again, thank you guys for listening, and hopefully we will be back on a normal recording schedule here soon. So see you guys next time. Peace.
Thank you guys for listening. Peace.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Free For All podcast. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the show and connect with us on Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest content. Peace.